give me a minute, please. Can you try speaking it again, Eric, please?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Can you be a little louder, please?
Can you hear me now?
No, it's still
Speak wrong. 1, 2, 3, 4.
1, 2, 3, 4. If you can say that, please, Eric. Testing
Yeah,
1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3, 4. Testing.
Okay,
1,
that's
2, 3,
fine.
4.
That's fine. That's fine. Eric, if you could just mute yourself, I'll test with Veronica now.
Okay.
Hello.
Hi, Veronica. Can you please try to open your video and speak something?
Hello. Hi. How are you? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you very well. Perfect.
Great.
Sure. We will be just starting in a bit. So please, if you want some water, you can help yourself. And I'll send you a message online. Thank you.
Thank you.
everyone. So we will start the next session very soon. If you have your friends or colleagues who are not here in the room with us, please help me a little bit to call them. For those who just joined us this afternoon, we do also have interpretation for Thai and English. So you can get the headset at the registration table. Channel 1 will be for English and Channel 2 will be for Thai สำหรับแขกท่านไหนที่เพิ่งเข้าร่วมกับเราในตอนบ่ายนี้นะคะทางเรามีอุปกรณ์การแปลมี
session gonna start now. If anyone want to join, please go to the ballroom 3.
Thank you for helping us. Yes, so if anyone need a headset, please do go get it at the registration table. สำหรับท่านไหนที่ต้องการอุปกรณ์การแปลนะคะสามารถรับหูฟังได้ที่โต๊ะลงทะเบียนด้านหน้าได้เลยค่ะ We will wait for a little bit for more people transferring to this room. We have a couple more people joining us now. Can I see a hand for who has been with us since the morning? And who just joined this afternoon? All right, if you did not have a chance to visit the marketplace in the next room, right after the session, the marketplace is still available until 5. So please feel free to join and have some discussion with the representative from many organizations from different countries. All right, may I welcome you again officially. So this session, it will be the crucial dialogue on unpacking the risks and impacts of the global race for Asia critical minerals, which organized by Fair Finance Asia and Fair Finance Thailand. My name is Feen Putisha Kantamanon, and I'm very honored to be your MC for today. Before we begin, I would like to go through a few housekeeping items. So as I mentioned, we have interpretation available. So if you do need it, please inform the staff to get the headset. The channel 1 is for English and channel 2 is for Thai. And before you leave the venue, please remember to return the headset to the registration table and collect your ID card back. For our online participants, Thai translation is available. Please use the interpretation function to tune into Thai. เราได้มีการจัดเตรียมล่ามแปลภาษา
So we have prepared simultaneous interpretation. You can collect the headset at the registration table, and please do not forget to return the headset before you leave the venue. So for channel 1 is English, and for channel 2 is Thai.
ร่วมออนไลน์ท่านสามารถ
So for those joining online, you can use interpretation function to listen to Thai.
Silence your devices, and for those who join us virtually, please make sure you mute yourself unless you're speaking. You can drop your comment and questions in the chat box, and the moderator will indicate when you can contribute to the discussions. And please note that today's session is being recorded and live streamed. If you would like not to be photographed or included in the video, please make sure you take a seat in the back of the room. And I do believe that you will have a red sticker to indicate that you would not like to be photographed. So please make sure it's visible to our team. Aside from today's session, Fair Finance Thailand also have organized an outdoor session on October 3rd, Friday, which is the Strides of Solidarity Run for Climate Justice and Just Transition that leave no one behind. So if you would like to join us for the run in the morning from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m., please make sure you use the QR code to register. And yes, thank you for your attention. I think now we will move forward to the session. So yes, please bear Bernadette Victorio, Program Lead of Fair Finance Asia. I will transfer to you now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm fully aware that we just completed the marketplace. So I know that some people, I could see them as the door opens, are still outside. Can I ask some of my teammates to please herd the people back in? Maybe we give it 1 more minutes and then we can start. Yep. Thank you so much for your patience. Let's wait for, this is a very interesting discussion, so I want to make sure that we have more people in the room to listen to our very insightful, valuable comments that will come from our esteemed panel. So let's give it 1 more minute and then I'm going to start to introduce the session. And could I ask already the slides to be up?
Hi everyone, just remind you again, our critical mineral session is happening now. If everyone can join, if anyone can join, please.
It's 2:55, so we are 10 minutes from when we were supposed to start. So I think I'm going to get a head start now. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. We really appreciate your presence. We are very happy to be hosting this event alongside the Bangkok Climate Action Week. And we are so happy to have a very esteemed panel with us to discuss our very important topic for today, which is unpacking the risks and impacts of the global race for Asia's transition minerals. I'm going to give a short background of the session, and then I'm going to start introducing our panel as I also ask them specific questions. I also want to recognize that we have a couple of panelists that are joining us online, and also we have participants also joining us via the streaming link. So we will also take questions from them later on when we open the discussion to Q&A. I just want to mention that this session is also covered under the T20 agenda. And that's why we have this also wonderful opportunity to share knowledge with our counterparts from South Africa today on the specific topic. So let me start to introduce the session. While the economic potential of critical minerals is immense, the rapid expansion of the sector carries significant risks. The historical precedent of resource-driven development, often referred to as resource curse or sacrifice zone, warns of substantial macroeconomic and development risks, including corruption, inequality, environmental degradation, and development risks, and social injustice. Across the regional body of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or the ASEAN, national level interests are perceived to impact regional vulnerability if critical mineral initiatives are not embedded within a cooperative framework. ASEAN has the potential to harness and leverage its collective market power to negotiate better terms with international partners and diversify and modernize its sectoral supply chains. This context highlights a vital role for multinational development banks as well and financial institutions as influential agents of change through cross-border investments. This is a recurring theme that we've been discussing since this morning. By requiring compliance with international sustainability standards as a condition for financing and investments, multilateral development banks, or MDBs, and financial institutions can potentially become agents of institutional reform that could lead to improved local outcomes. In that context, this session being organized by Fair Finance Asia in collaboration with Fair Finance Thailand aims to facilitate a common understanding among stakeholders about the risks and opportunities associated with the critical mineral sector in the ASEAN, in Asia overall. And this includes acknowledging the resource, curse, and sacrifice zone risks, as well as the potential for economic growth and regional cooperation. Identify ways in which MDBs and financial institutions can use their financing and investment leverage to influence sustainable practices and benefit sharing, and highlight emerging examples where possible. This could include requiring compliance with international sustainability standards and mandating disclosure and transparency requirements, as well as more active support for alternative models of accountable capitalism, such as worker and community ownership. Exchange ideas on how to promote a regional framework to facilitate sustainable cross-border finance for critical mineral supply chain that will foster strong sectoral partnerships among governments, private sector, civil society, MDBs, financial institutions, including lessons learned and models from the African region. And finally, as part of the T20 agenda, as a side session of it, this discussion will contribute towards the T20 communique during the South Africa presidency of the 2025 G20, focused on the task force on accelerating climate action and just energy transition. Now, having said that, I'm very happy to introduce the panel that is with us to discuss this, starting with Ms. Robbie Halip from Rights Energy Partnership with Indigenous People. Robbie belongs to the Kalanguya and Kankanay indigenous peoples in the Cordillera region in the Philippines. She is the current coordinator of the Indigenous Peoples Major Group for Sustainable Development and Rights Energy Partnership with Indigenous peoples. Her work mainly focuses on the advancement of the recognition and respect of Indigenous peoples' rights in relevant processes in the Agenda 2030 for sustainable development and ensuring transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy that is just and sustainable for Indigenous people. Welcome to the panel, Robbie. We also have Veronica Fadzai Zano, the Regional Program Advisor for Extractive Industry from Oxfam, South Africa. She's joining us online. She is a holder of Masters in Law in Constitutional and Human Rights Law, Bachelor of Laws Honors, and alumni of the USA State Department's in International Visitors Leadership Program on Transparency and Accountability. We also have with us Chetra Nayak from the Asia Investor Group on Climate Change. Chetra is responsible for leading the transition working group at AIGCC. In 2025, Chetra was appointed as a member of the Regional Council for Asia Pacific on the Task Force on Inequality and Social-Related Financial Disclosures. Chetra has more than 10 years of diverse experience. Sorry, I lost the PPT. Chetra has more than 10 years of diverse experience working in sustainable finance across consulting and capital markets. Welcome, Chetra. We also have Supanat Kaulek. I hope I pronounced that correctly. He's the Justice Officer from professional level at the Ministry of Justice Thailand. Ministry of Justice Thailand is responsible for ensuring the functioning of the justice system in the country, and they are also very much involved in driving the process for the development of human rights due diligence compliance in the country. Online, we are joined by Mr. Eric J. Lam, Energy Transition Specialist from the Asian Development Bank. Eric is a member of the Energy Sector Office Energy Transition Team, where he works on energy transition modeling and planning and critical minerals to manufacturing value chains. Prior to joining ADB, Eric worked for several Canadian government ministries, including the Environment and Climate Change Canada, Natural Resources Canada, and Transport Canada. Welcome, Eric. And finally, we have Dr. Ambia Abdullah from ASEAN, who is a senior researcher from the ASEAN Center for Energy, ACE. Dr. Ambia is currently working as a senior researcher at the Energy Modeling and Policy Planning Departments at the ASEAN Center for Energy in Jakarta, Indonesia. Before joining ACE, she worked as a carbon pricing economist responsible for the Article 6 assessment of projects at Global Green Growth Institute in Seoul, South Korea. Welcome, Ambia. And my name is Bernadette Victorio. I am leading the Fair Finance Asia program, and I will be moderating the session for today. That was a very long introduction. I hope that you are very much awake. I'm going to start to throw the questions to our esteemed panel now, starting with Robbie. So Robbie, historically, indigenous peoples have borne disproportionate environmental and social costs from resource extraction. We know that financial institutions and regulatory frameworks need to be improved so that free, prior, and informed consent, FPIC, is not treated just as a procedural checkbox, but it's a mandatory step. Beyond this, though, we need indigenous peoples to decide whether and how to engage in projects on their territories and to ensure that they share benefits. Please help us set the scene of this panel and describe to us how indigenous people, from your perspective and from the work you're doing in your organization, would like to see that happen. What specific pathways and approaches would you consider acceptable in the partnership, whether or not the indigenous people would like to engage in these projects?
Hello? Okay, it's working. Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. I see familiar faces. I think before I go to how do we go about it, no? Well, from our end as indigenous peoples, me personally coming from territories that are already mined out and are consistently being mined out because of this race for critical minerals, I think it's important to look at the impacts. No? We're not just talking for indigenous peoples, we're not just talking about displacement, we're not just talking about loss of livelihood, loss of lives, but we're also talking about the division that's created within communities when the free, prior, and informed consent process is co-opted and manipulated. And this division that's caused within communities is irreparable, and it has a very grave impact to indigenous communities whose way of life is collective, Once this is destroyed, the community cohesion is destroyed, it's difficult to bring it back. And we see it happening in many mining affected communities where they've been divided, they've been co-opted, they've been threatened and harassed to say yes to the project. The other big impact of mining in our territories is also the destruction of culturally significant areas, places where we conduct rituals, burial areas, and these areas are very significant to our continuity and identity as indigenous peoples. Once these are destroyed, it impacts how we also continue with our culture and our tradition. And these are just some of the impacts that we are experiencing. And with the race for the critical minerals, for clean technology, we again see a rise of mining in indigenous people's territories, as well as imposition of climate solutions, supposedly for the 1.5 target, this imposition of conservation areas and protected areas. Now, going back to mining, what's quite disturbing for us is even in areas that's inhabited by uncontacted or indigenous peoples in voluntary isolation are not spared. This is the case of the Ohangana Manyawa in Indonesia, where nickel mining is right smack in the middle of their territory. They're now forced to be in partial contact with people outside their community to be able to seek help, and this should not be the case. No, this should not be the case for indigenous peoples in voluntary isolation and for indigenous peoples communities in general. Now we see developments in the private sector and also in the financial sector in relation to the recognition of indigenous people's land rights, but also the need to conduct free, prior, and informed consent. The recent adoption of the safeguards of the Asia Development Bank is a development from broad community support to free, prior, and informed consent, and as part of the Indigenous Peoples Advisory Group engaging with the AEDB, we've been part of that in pushing the bank to put the language on free, prior, and informed consent. Also noting that in the Asia Development Bank's critical minerals mining framework, they've also not only identified free, prior, and informed consent, but also no-go zones for mining on projects that will be invested on by the bank. But these are all in paper. Our experience is also that beyond paper, the implementation is quite dismal. So we also challenge businesses and financial institutions to make sure that these words are not just there in paper, but really implemented on the ground. Now, how do we want to see that within businesses and financial sectors? No? It's important to look at the free, prior, and informed consent process not as a standalone process, but as a respect for the collective rights of indigenous peoples to our land, territories, and resources, and our right to determine the development that we want. And that means really engaging with indigenous peoples, not just towards the end towards the end of the process, because most of the time it's a procedural process in the government where you need to do FPIC with indigenous peoples as part of the compliance, the tick box. No? But on our end, it should be at the onset when the project is being planned, when the project is being designed, indigenous people should already be engaged. When the impacts of the project is being looked at, it's important that indigenous peoples are engaged, because as I was saying earlier, it's important that we identify where are our culturally significant areas, how will they be impacted by these mining projects. Now, in the energy transition, we're not, just to be clear, we're not anti-development and we're not against the transition to fossil fuels. We are very much supporting the transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy, but we want to be part of it. We want to be part of this. We want to be contributors and actors to reaching this initiative of the energy transition. Now, in the work of the Right Energy Partnership with Indigenous people, so what we've been pushing forward is also support for Indigenous peoples-led renewable energy initiatives. And this is not just looking at access to energy for indigenous communities who don't have access to energy, but a more holistic support in relation to electrification, but also support for livelihood, and also supporting the overall protection of land and resources of indigenous peoples. And that's the approach that we're putting forward in the Right Energy Partnership with Indigenous peoples. We don't just electrify indigenous households. We need to look at the productive end use, we need to look at the sustainability, and we also need to look at the protection of the environment and the people. And we hope that in the region where mining of critical minerals is happening in indigenous territories, this will also be looked at in the energy transition, that indigenous peoples cannot again be sacrificed in this transition. We are partners, we are providing solutions, and we hope that states, businesses, and financial actors will also directly partner with us, provide direct financing for any indigenous-led initiatives, and that we can go through this together and address this climate crisis that we are facing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robbie. I'm very glad that we've given you the first word because you have very well set the tone of the discussion and really what are the asks coming from the communities that should be, involved in the development of these projects. And I really love that you highlighted the fact that these are not victims of development. In fact, these are, people that are not opposed to development at all. Indigenous peoples are partners of development, in fact. And I think there's something really empowering about that, that I think we have to highlight here. That's, communities, grassroots communities, indigenous peoples, and these groups should be looked at as partners, and therefore they are not only part of the tick box exercise that we have to do, but they have to be there from the whole project cycle, right? And I know that Robbie already called on the Asian Development Bank, so we are very good in our sequence because Eric is actually up next. Eric, having heard from Robbie and building on what she's already talked about, how will the Asian Development Bank ensure its new approach to critical mineral financing in Asia integrates rigorous international sustainability standards and safeguards to prevent what she already referred to being part of the resource curse that we have historically seen, specifically pertaining to redressing inequality and upholding the rights and well-being of communities in the region? And also, what concrete steps will the Asian Development Bank take to leverage its role in the regional cooperation to support ASEAN governments and private sector partners in building resilient, transparent, and benefit-sharing supply chains, including mechanisms for monitoring compliance and sharing good practices from the region? Eric, over to you.
Thanks, Bernadette. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Great.
Yes, we do.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Apologies for not being able to attend in person, but yes, so I'm Eric. I'm an energy specialist here at the Asian Development Bank, and I'll be talking about ADB's critical minerals to manufacturing value chains board direction and a bit about what ADB's work is on in this space. And yeah, so basically, recently in July, ADB's board direction on critical minerals to manufacturing value chains approach paper, or board direction paper, was endorsed by our board of directors. And so this approach, it's fairly new. And so this is a space where ADB is really just starting to implement. And it's really great to be here today to hear from the different panelists, just to hear about, what are the best practices, what are some of the challenges, and to take back to ADB some lessons learned. And so I just have one slide here today, and just at a high level, what is the whole value chain approach in our board direction, and what are strategic focus areas? So When we talk about critical minerals to manufacturing or CMM, we're really taking a whole value chain approach. So it's not just mineral extraction, it's looking at the processing, the manufacturing, the assembly, all the way to the recycling of clean technologies like clean energy technology, so solar panels, wind turbines, and so forth. And we also have 6 strategic focus areas that the ADB is focusing on. Particularly, which is important, is the regional cooperation, ESG, and supporting governments to effectively manage and responsibly and sustainability their resources. The question itself, I think, is a bit of a winded one. So I'll break it down into 3 parts. I'll start with talking about the resource curse, our approach to safeguards, and then maybe about regional cooperation and how it all ties together. So I think for me, the resource curse, I think personally, is less about the sustainability standards and safeguards, but more so the importance of, economic diversification and how we can support a just transition and help countries who are looking to expand or get into different markets from critical minerals to manufacturing, how they can address this so-called resource curse. So our approach really is focused on this and is aware of the risk for the resource curse, or what's known as Dutch disease, which is where mineral wealth can really lead to inequality, poor governance, or misdevelopment opportunities if they're not managed properly. And so that's why our approach really focuses on the importance of economic diversification, domestic value addition, job creation, and inclusive growth. So ADB, as I said, we haven't really been in this mining extractive sectors for quite some time. But we do have a lot of experience in other sectors in helping countries with diversification, whether it's in the finance sector or agriculture. But for critical minerals, what we're looking at is, if there are countries that are very resource rich or that may have some other areas that could be using or could have some support in, we're looking at different areas of the entire value chain. So how can they reap, their mineral resources and, to support their processing, their manufacturing or recycling sectors. We do have a public sector management and governance team. And so that team works with governments directly in areas like strengthening tax systems, improving domestic revenue mobilization, strengthening or helping support the development of sovereign wealth funds. And they're currently looking into how mineral revenues can be used and reinvested in national or subnational priorities or result in fair benefit sharing. Recently, our team just had a workshop with the OECD on training for some of our developing member countries on taxation for the mineral sector. On safeguards specifically, so safeguards is really a cornerstone of ADB support. I am not from our safeguards team, so I'm happy to refer any questions to our team after this session. But just to say that every ADB project, whether it's critical minerals to manufacturing or agriculture, energy, transport, so on, they must comply with our safeguard standard. ADB has a new environment and social framework, which was adopted in 2024, and it'll be implemented or come into effect in January 2026. And just to note that part of the new environment and social framework, all projects will need to have free, prior, and informed consent, so FPIC, for Indigenous peoples. The new ESF also includes 10 environment and social standards. So there's different standards, including one on labor and working conditions, Indigenous peoples, and stakeholder engagement. And ADB just recently published these ESS guidance notes, which are now available for public consultation. So we're asking the public to feed into these guidance notes. Specifically for critical minerals and manufacturing, we are developing some due diligence guidance notes as well. And so this will look at benchmarking our internal ADB standards with global best practices to see where are the gaps, where we can address sector-specific risk, particularly for areas like labor rights, land use, and biodiversity. And then finally, I think on regional cooperation, I think ADB as an MDB is uniquely positioned to help out either ASEAN or private sector partners. I think it's really just the bread and butter of what ADB support is. So ADB really brings in support to help drive economic growth and development, sharing of best practices, and bringing in countries to promote ESG standards, trade, and so on. So ADB is currently active in supporting ASEAN, the Central Asia Regional Economic Program, or CAREC, and the Pacific Island Forums. And these are just some bodies where we promote regional cooperation. on issues including trade, regional public goods, and the harmonization of ESG standards. In fact, there's actually an ASEAN minerals conference going on right now in Laos, where we have ADB speaking on some of these issues. And last year in November, we actually hosted a regional cooperation and integration conference on critical minerals in Vietnam. At the same time, we're also working with partners like the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, so the EITI. And next year, we'll be supporting the government of the Philippines as they're hosting the Global EITI conference in June. And then lastly, I think we're also working with the ILO on a project for decent work in supply chains. We're conducting a study currently on the ESG risk in ASEAN for specifically wind energy supply chains, which will result in some policy recommendations. So I think just to tie all three of that together, I think safeguards is one element of it, but there's a sort of whole ADB approach when it comes to supporting developing member countries in addressing such issues. But there's also a huge key impact, important factor in terms of engaging civil society and indigenous peoples organizations, those who especially have the experience on the ground, who know how the countries work in these specific projects. I think that's really where we'll be able to learn and take back. And as we start implementing this approach, we would really benefit from hearing from stakeholders and colleagues who are currently in the room. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric. So there's a lot to maybe then follow up and discuss after this session together with Robbie and her group, especially, as listening to what you've shared on ADB's approach and next steps in its critical mineral supply chains approach. So that would be really good to see how to involve more deeply the indigenous people groups as mentioned by Robbie's intervention. Now, I'm going to go to the other representative from the financial group in the panel. And we have Chetra here representing the Asia Investor Group on climate change. I'm aware that, there are also some progressive ideas within your network, and building on the interventions from Robbie and Eric, what are your reactions in your role as the representative from the investor network on how the relevance of the demands and evidence provided can be effectively relayed to investors? And within the strategy of AIGCC's, for example, place-based transition approach, what examples or what scope can you already factor in the importance in terms of cross-border impacts, dependencies, risks, and opportunities? And finally, please share some concrete examples on what innovative pathways can Asian investors explore to promote benefit sharing and more accountable capitalism, with a focus on extractive industries and based on the sharing also that you heard from speakers in the panel. Chetra, over to you.
Thanks, Bea. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I think maybe I'll skip the slides for now. Maybe it's very interesting to answer your questions. So maybe I'll focus on that and then just move to the financing last slide that I have here a little bit later. So just sharing from Eric and Robbie is very useful to contextualize two major stakeholders, obviously the indigenous people and then the DFIs. So from an Asian Investor Network Organization, the role that we can play towards these evidences is to bring these evidences to our investor group. So we work with primarily asset managers and asset owners. And just 2 months back, we had a critical minerals masterclass that was organized over the period of 1 month, wherein we did 3 sessions and deep dives on different topics that were relevant to the critical minerals conversation, starting from putting context on investment risks in the space, and then moving a little bit more on the environmental and social risks, and then having investors contribute to ways in which they are engaging on topic of nature, biodiversity, and just transition, that are all three priority issues that exist in the sector. So we were early days in terms of building this program up, because we work individually on nature and just transition, but on this sector, I think a lot of work is to be done. There are fantastic resources that sort of, legitimize a lot of the evidences that we hear from a social risk perspective on harm done to people in indigenous people groups, or how livelihoods are lost. But sometimes, investors are so far up the value chain. How do you sort of bring them in more closer to working with corporates and with policymakers is something that we try to bridge in terms of a gap. So like I mentioned, maybe one way to start is contextualizing the investment risk. So this sector has grown exponentially from a commodity perspective, I think, in the last few years. It's unprecedented. There is some recalibration needed. But to put together maybe some risks that are emerging is investors think about there is a deficit in some of the critical minerals, especially lithium and copper. There is oversupply evidence in some, specifically like battery grade nickel. There is also the risk of environmental mining, that is the environmental risks from mining in the areas. And then there is social risk that we heard from Robbie very clearly on the indigenous community. A lot of these risks are, from an investor perspective, are in the upstream phase that we're focusing on. So forgive me not going beyond the upstream sector. But these are very relevant investment risks, and a lot of investors are currently thinking of how portfolios need to be redesigned when it comes to these investment risks. So this exponential growth of this sector has come with environmental and social risks, and they are very far up the value chain to sort of put emphasis on how to solve for these risks. So the evidences that we bring towards our asset managers and asset owners are to contextualize this. So for example, we had a speaker share at one of our sessions on how Indonesian, these big plants of Morowali and Baeda Bay, I don't know if you're familiar with them, but that is causing the community in that particular region in Indonesia mentioned that they don't really get the nickel story because an electric vehicle is not something they'll ever have access to. So, giving these examples to our investor group becomes really hard-hitting when it comes to say that these are relevant examples. There is livelihood loss associated with mining in these areas. There's coal expansion, an irony happening in these regions. There is occupational health and safety hazards that is happening in these regions. So we've brought these evidences to our investor network group, and we have a few early movers in this space on how to address these risks. So some sort of early best practices that are emerging, and I will sort of put a disclaimer and say that these are far and few examples. There's a lot of work that needs to go to better manage environmental and social risks, but some early best practices that are emerging are on community ownership or benefit sharing, where there's a royalty element associated with the mining output. So a certain percentage of the mining output from USD perspective is allocated to the community of that region. That is happening to a smaller extent in some regions. We also discussed critical minerals from the context of out of the region in the lithium triangle. So one sort of discussion that came up from there is that many a times that, sometimes the corporates have to step in at a de facto level to say that they are going to be sort of becoming compliance managers in these regions, because maybe the government does not have that much focus towards understanding the nuances of these environmental and social risks. So that brings me to something that we did work on at AIGCC on place-based just transitions. So as part of this report, although this is not focused on critical minerals, what we looked at is that every transition needs to be place-based and contextualized in the sense of real impacts on real people in real places. And that means every transition is not generic. It needs to be rooted in local realities. So we looked at the policy baseline of 4 markets: India, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Japan. And the objective of the report is to give our investors in the region an idea of where policy sits today from the context of a just transition and in what direction we need to move. And then maybe lastly, I'll just touch upon an emerging sort of perspective of financing. So a lot of the financing that is going to go to just transition is highlighted from the perspective of a blended finance or the mixing of capital. So these are young pilot models that we need to see grow, that need to be scaled. A lot of the financial instruments today that are blended finance models are of several millions of US dollars, but they need to grow. A lot of us, there's a risk-sharing approach that happens as part of the blended finance model that is becoming, quite prevalent in the industry. So a lot of work needs to be done on that perspective. And the second one is on concessional capital. So a lot of just transition financing is non-commercial, which means to say that it's not immediately profit generating. But there are some investors who are building the social outcomes in the investment case itself via these new financial instruments. So that is another sort of example of how we can sort of finance the just transition with the focus on the critical mineral sector. I think I covered most of the questions, but yeah, happy to take a few towards the end of the session as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chetra. And I think what you shared about how far investors are, from the realities that we see on the ground in the supply chain really requires a lot of advocacy and explanation. And I think it's really important for them to understand how, important their role is to address those impacts. So it's good to see that there is already some early movers and some examples that we could potentially, scale up and become more mainstream in the future. So we'd love to hear more about that perhaps later on when we have time. And at this point, then I'm gonna move from the perspective of the financial sector to the perspective of the public sector. We have with us, of course, Ambia from the ASEAN, and we know that the ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation, APAEC, will be launched from 2026 to 2030, with the theme emphasizing just and inclusive energy transition, and this includes the fair distribution of costs and benefits as a guiding principle. And so, in this context, how can we see ASEAN policymakers concretizing this commitment through regulation that incentivizes benefit sharing as a fundamental component of just transition, and emphasizing that green economy shift must not create new forms of inequality? I think it's really important to hear what kind of guidance and support the ASEAN is providing to its member states to move towards a direction of fair distribution of cost and benefits, particularly in the area of transition mineral mining, supporting just energy transition. Over to you, Ambia.
Thank you, Berna, and thank you for other speaker. I learned a lot. So thank you for inviting us, ASEAN Center for Energy. We are under the ASEAN. We are represent the 10 ASEAN member states, including Timor-Leste, right now. So we focus on the energy sector in ASEAN member state. So to answer the question, of course, critical mineral is one of the important part of the energy cooperation in the next, APEC. APEC represent ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation, and we aim to launch the next APEC for 2026 to 2030 in the coming 2 weeks in the ASEAN Ministry of Energy meeting in Kuala Lumpur on October 15, next week exactly. So I prepared some slide, I think 2 slides, just to give an overview how's the interlink among the strategic plan of action under the ASEAN Secretariat. I mean, because we deal with the regional level, not on the individual one. So we know about the ASEAN 2045 and ASEAN Economic Community, because energy sector is part of the ASEAN Economic Community, and we just also launched the ASEAN Economic Community Strategic Plan 2026-2030. This is called is our big umbrella, including the ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation. And another one, we also have ASEAN Community Vision 2045. It's also endorsed previously in the official meeting of the ASEAN. And when we look on the global level, there were also discussion on the several important issues as well. I will move to next slide. Okay. No, it's too fast. Okay, now let me introduce briefly about the ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation 2026 to 2030. This strategic plan is important because this is kind of the main reference for the energy cooperation for the coming next 5 years, when the ASEAN member state will conduct any energy cooperation with the donors and other stakeholder. The detail will be launched in the next AMEM. This is to give an overview, like Berna mentioned. In this next 5 years, the ASEAN already, during the previous year, ASEAN Ministry of Energy meeting in Laos, the meeting endorsed the theme for the ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation is advancing regional cooperation in ensuring energy security and advancing decarbonization for a just and inclusive energy transition. So this is for the first time the term of the just and inclusive energy transition officially endorsed by the Ministry of Energy of the 10 ASEAN member states. Means the ASEAN member states really seriously take this just and inclusive energy transition as a key part of the energy cooperation for the next 5 years. So in energy cooperation itself, we have 7 priority key area represent the key priority area for energy sector in ASEAN. In all, we can see from here, in all the energy cooperation for the next 5 years of the ASEAN, we aim to have 3 key pillars. One is energy security and resilience, because it's important for energy sector in ASEAN member state for the next coming decade. We learn a lot from the several global event issue affecting the energy security in ASEAN as well. So we aim to have like secure and resilient. And the second pillar is, we can see here, just and inclusive energy transition. So we want to make sure that this aspect is really part of all the energy cooperation for the all key 7 priority area for the ASEAN. So when we look on the just and inclusive energy transition, we can see that it's not only one sector. I mean, it's not only in one particular energy sector, but it's embedded in all 7 key priority area of energy sector. In 7 key priority area, we have like renewable energy. We also have like clean coal energy transition. I believe clean coal is one of the hot issue right now, and we also have like gas in ASEAN, and we also have like a regional energy and policy planning as one of the key priority area. And we also have nuclear for power and industry, and also another one, emerging technology and digitalization. So we want to have just and inclusive energy transition is embedded in all the key priority area of energy sector in ASEAN for the next coming 5 years. So before going to this, if we look on the example what we have been done, until we officially mention about the just and inclusive energy transition in the ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation, we started the ongoing activity. I mean, we complete some ongoing activity, like we have ASEAN mainstreaming gender on energy sector, and we also collaborate with Oxfam on providing the policy tool how to include the just and inclusive energy transition. And we also now have ongoing project with the Australia to ensure about the JETC is also ensuring embedded in energy transition in ASEAN. And another one, we have a supply chain on critical minerals. So this is one of the important issue in ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation in the next 5 years, and also circular economy, and we can see like gender JETC also part, and financing. Financing is important because it's for the first time we also put the financing as one of the enabling cross-sectoral issue for energy cooperation in ASEAN. So we hope financing also would be help ASEAN member state to advance the energy transition in ASEAN. Probably I stop here, and please feel free to come with another question or discussion point. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ambia. I think that's all good and very interesting. I just had a little bit of a concern about green coal. I've never heard of that terminology before, but perhaps I'm looking at the crowd. Maybe that is a point for further questions in our Q&A. Let me move on at this point first, because I would like to get everyone in the panel for a word before we delve into the very interesting points that are being brought up in the panel right now. So since we are with the public sector, I'll stay with the public sector and talk to Supanat from the Justice Ministry in Thailand. We know that Thailand is taking a major step towards strengthening corporate accountability by drafting a new law that will require businesses to conduct human rights and environmental due diligence. And we know that by introducing this, Thailand can set a precedent in Asia for corporate responsibility, and this is a really important move. While Thailand is not one of the critical minerals hotspots, it is a potential production hub if we are going to connect supply chains, as was kind of alluded to in the discussion, perhaps from the ADB and maybe in future projects. Now, given Thailand's stance on corporate responsibility and accountability, how do you see or reflect on this approach of Thailand in line with the current global approach to transition mineral mining, or even the regional one based on what you heard in this panel? And how would you see Thailand's policy steer potentially influencing the development of a regional production hub, and whether Thailand becomes involved in that? How would you enforce, for example, your mandatory human and environmental rights due diligence, of course applying to Thai-based companies, but of course also as part of a more complex production chain? Supanat, over to you.
Thank you very much for your question. Good afternoon, everyone. To begin, I would like to thank Fair Finance Asia for organizing this event and having the Ministry of Justice on this panel. Responding to your question, I think the government of ASEAN country, including Thailand, should do what I call 3 Ps: policy, practice, and partnership. The first P is policy, which means that the government should develop and adopt law or policy about business and human rights to ensure that business enterprises respect human rights throughout their own activities. And this law and practices should be developed in line with international standards, such as United Nations Guiding Principle on Business and Human Rights, Responsible Business Conduct, and other generally accepted international standards. And in the developing this law and policy, it is essential for the government to engage with all stakeholders in order to ensure that the policy reflects the need of all stakeholders, including business sector, local community, and civil society organization. The good example that's come to mind about this kinds of policy is the Thai experience in the adoption of National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. Thailand developed the NAP, we call it NAP, based on the United Nations Guiding Principle on Business and Human Rights. And it got a good feedback and support from all stakeholders because it passed several rounds of consultation with all stakeholders. That's why it's gained a lot of support now. And this is the first P, the policy. The second P is practice. Under this category, the government should do two main things. The first one is the government should serve as a role model for responsible business. For example, state-owned enterprises should operate with respect to human rights and the environment. And moreover, the state-owned enterprise can use their leverage to influence policy and conduct of their business partners throughout their value chain. Another example is for the government to incorporate human rights and environmental consideration into the criteria of public procurement. And the second thing under this category is for the government to facilitate the responsible business transformation. This can be done by initiating benefits and incentive for business enterprise that respect human rights and the environment. Example of this kind of incentive is such as tax deduction, access to low interest loan, and the inclusion into the preferred list of public procurement. All of these measures can encourage company to become more socially and environmentally responsible. And the last P is partnership. The government effort to drive forward responsible business conduct cannot be succeed without the cooperation with stakeholders. For this reason, the government should work hand in hand with all stakeholders. For example, by raising awareness on responsible business conduct or business and human rights agenda to all stakeholders, especially business sector and local community, then the government should create a good environment for cooperation. For example, the government should ensure a safe environment for local community and whistleblower to exercise their freedom of expression through the adoption of anti-slave legislation. These kinds of law can protect people from lawsuit if they express their will for the public interest and in a good faith manner. Talking about the experience of Thailand, now we are developing the mandatory human rights due diligence law. And this law is mandating big company to conduct human rights due diligence. when they operate their business activity within the country, and also when they invest in other country as well. So the current draft has 5 chapters and 41 articles. The first chapter is about general provision, which include definition. The second part is about human rights and environmental due diligence process. Chapter 3 is about human rights and environmental due diligence oversight committee, which will be oversee the process of human rights due diligence in the country. And chapter 4 is about measure to promote and support human rights and environmental due diligence. For example, some incentive that the government will provide for the company that comply with the law. And the last chapter is the penalty in case of the failure to comply with obligation under this legislation. And this draft law received a mix of feedback. We gained support from civil society, but we got strong pushback from the business sector because they will that this draft will place a lot of burden on them. So the drafting process might take a long time to go, and we have to find a common ground for the law that can be accepted by all stakeholders. And the second law that we are now developing is the anti-SLAPP legislation in order to ensure that people in Thailand are protected from lawsuit if they express their opinion for the public interest and in a good faith. This law is under the drafting process and it is not finished yet. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Supanat. I think this is a really interesting national level experience because I think we have talked about in this panel so far, of course, what are the demands from the community, specifically from the indigenous peoples group as represented by Robbie. And then we talked about the efforts from the financial sector actors, which are pretty much voluntary. So there are no mandatory requirements compelling right now financial institutions and investors to act in a certain way. And interestingly, listening to this experience from Thailand, where there is a mandatory measure that would compel investors coming to your country and then Thai investors going outside, this would be a really good case study for how that's going to happen and how that's going to potentially apply to the sectors such as transition minerals if Thailand was part of a big complex production hub across the region, or also given that Thailand has a very big lithium, for example, deposit, and perhaps in the future that also becomes part of what is explored there. So really interesting to hear from that. But now I think at this point, last but not the least, I would like to call on Veronica, who is joining us from South Africa. Veronica, thank you so much for your patience. Having heard everyone from the panel, I think you have a full set of insights to reflect on and to share with us, and to reflect on and to basically share the experience from the African perspective in holding financial institutions such as the African Development Bank, Africa Finance Corporation involved in critical minerals and extractive projects accountable, and to actively support just transition principles. I'm also fully aware that Oxfam South Africa has been very much involved in, developing innovative partnerships already since you have been working in this area, perhaps longer than us, or at least, before more accelerated attention has been shed on this side of the world in the extractive industries. But we are aware that you have, for example, promoted community trusts as part of the approach in just energy transition partnerships. So it would be really good for you to share some experience in that for the panel and also the participants in this session. Veronica, over to you.
Thank you so much, Madam Moderator. Please confirm you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you, but a little bit soft.
Okay,
Sorry,
how
I'm
about now?
echoing.
Is it better now?
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much for also offering the platform to be part of this very great initiative and the rich discussions that have been happening since I suppose since when I joined in this afternoon. So my name is Veronica Zano, as been introduced, and I'm from Oxfam. In Southern Africa, also working closely with Oxfam South Africa. So I think from this, I think what is the state, they
Sorry, Veronica, your audio is breaking, so we are trying to fix the technical issue here. Could you say something again just to test if the audio is better?
Just a minute, maybe I can join from another. I'm using my iPad. I can try to use my phone. Maybe it will be better. Just a minute.
Okay. While we are waiting for Veronica to sort out her technical issues, I would like to look at the audience, and I think you have already heard very varied insights from the panel so far. After Veronica's intervention, we are going to come to Q&A. So I would like to invite and encourage you to formulate the questions in your mind and be actively engaged in the Q&A discussion. And this is your time to interact with the panel and ask your questions. I would also encourage the panel, because you heard each other's perspective, to interact with each other. We rarely do that in panel discussions, and I feel like it's a pity that we don't do that more. So feel free to ask each other also questions, especially, things that you heard from each other's intervention that you feel you would like to explore more as well. Eric, that's also for you. And of course, Veronica, if you're ready, please just say so.
Please confirm you can hear me now.
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. Thank you. Please go ahead.
All right, so thank you so much, and apologies for the glitch in terms of my network, but just also appreciating the opportunity to join virtually and also be part of this great discussion. So I think just picking on from your question, I think it's quite clear that there is a growing recognition that that is steering from different stakeholders, be it the government, through ministries such as Ministry of Justice, which are really key in terms of law formulation, from financial investors or institutions, civil society present, community-based organizations that are really the frontline communities with regards to the rush or in the critical minerals extraction, that there needs to be beneficial and a win-win situation which emanates from a lot of learning that has emanated from the legacy transition or the legacy extraction of broadly minerals across the world. And more so, I think it's quite clear that a lot of the actors are not just fixated on addressing the issues of the climate crisis, but in terms of also addressing some of the legacy challenges that have been posed by the mining sector, more so towards this issue of critical minerals extraction, particularly for the purposes of clean energy technology. And more, I think we're seeing a lot of strong regulatory and institutional safeguards being also employed and also being put into practice just to ensure that the energy transition is actually going to be done in a fair, just and sustainable manner. And more so, I think premising on this meeting we are in today, We're seeing that financial institutions, they really have the key role that they are going to be playing in terms of financing a lot of investments that are happening or that are going to be happening within the critical mineral supply chain. Because as we all know, mining is a very large capital intensive sector, and a lot of investors do take a lot of financing from the financial institutions, be it in terms of multilateral development banks, such as, for example, in Africa, where I'm coming from, the African Development Bank, where there are investors are actually going and seeking financing in terms of capital towards investments in this very vibrant and lucrative sector we're seeing. But I think for financial institutions, they are definitely also not recognizing that it's just not about financing. It's really about trying some of these financing that they're also putting in towards sustainable practices and also embedding issues of sustainable development. And we're seeing a lot of financial institutions really making a very clear intent about ensuring that any financing that they are putting in towards critical minerals, it could be in the form of extraction, it could be around issues of mineral beneficiation and value addition. It has to be embedded around ensuring that the sourcing of these minerals has to be done in accordance with environmental management, sustainable environmental management practices, but more importantly, addressing issues of human rights risks and challenges, more so towards de-risking the projects. And the de-risking is not basically just to ensure that they get a return on their investment, but ensuring that the projects which they are also financing ultimately create a social license to operate and shared value creation in the critical minerals boom. So we're seeing, I think, from the discussions and even from what we're seeing on the ground, that civil society, local communities are actually making a case that financing within the critical mineral supply chains should actually be embedded around issues of ESG. I think that has been spoken about by some of the presenters in this session, but more so ensuring that projects which are funded do have really strong provisions that tie financing towards compliance with some of those tenants with regards to ensuring that the communities that are on the ground do actually participate throughout the whole mining value chain and throughout the cycle of the projects, but also ensuring that there are also mechanisms in place that enable, for example, those safeguards to be actually put in place. So I'll also give an example, for example, what we're seeing within the African space, where, for example, the African Development Bank, they are actually anchoring a lot of initiatives around green energy technology, and they've been instrumental towards the development of the Africa Green Mineral Strategy. And one of its policy anchors has been really about ensuring that finances and funding and financing for mining in the critical mineral supply chain must actually conduct, for example, comprehensive environmental, social, and impact assessments, which entitle issues of principles of free, prior, informed consent, where communities and organizations such as us have really been vocal about ensuring that principles of free, prior, informed consent should be tied to financing and also national mining or extractive industry regulations. So we have initiatives such as the Integrated Safeguard System by the Africa Development Bank, which ties these elements of environmental social impact assessments really key in terms of the findings that they are going to be providing. There's also a strategic framework which has also been created, particularly around the Africa Development Bank's Natural Resource Management Investment Center. And under this, the broader strategic focus has been ensuring that financing is framed in terms of ensuring that it is embedded around the broader national development priorities and the community concerns around addressing some of the concerns that African citizens particularly have been concerned with regards to extraction and ensuring that win-win situations have happened. And tied to this has been a mechanism which you mentioned about ensuring that communities ultimately benefit from mining or energy transition projects that are happening. And more we're seeing some legislations, for example, in Malawi, having mandatory provisions on community development agreements, which are meant to be benefit sharing mechanisms by mining or extractive industry investments with the communities that are living within the vicinity. And tied to this is around ensuring that there are mandatory provisions which entail environmental and social compliance issues of ensuring that there is a framework to ensure community engagement throughout the whole cycle of the project. But also importantly, ensuring that there are also grievance redress mechanisms that are in place to ensure that any violations or any grievances that may emanate in the course of destruction are embedded around ensuring that there is recourse and remedy around those issues. And I think this is quite impressive, and we're seeing, for example, when you look at the Lobito corridor, which is one of a key infrastructure project which is tied to energy transition, where we have the US, the EU, and also the African Development and the Africa Finance Corporation really situating themselves and giving themselves a mandate of ensuring that the project has to have the highest international standards with respect to environmental sustainability and governance standards. And also issues of transparency and accountability, which has been a key concern, I think, for years beyond just this critical minerals rush, but more so ensuring that there is more incorporation and understanding around these issues. So I think for us as Oxfam, we continue to implore and continue to engage and make a case on why there is need to ensure that ultimately it just moves from the beyond rhetoric of having good policies on place in paper, but proper implementation mechanisms or oversight mechanisms which ensure that this just translates to implementation on the ground. And possibly, I think one of the key issues that we've been advocating is that there should be pre-investment conditions tied to some of these disbursements, for example, of financing this project. So the issues of the three informed consent, which I talked about. So I think if the financial institutions such as the Africa Development Bank, for example, can require evidence that process, for example, alignment of how an investment of theirs has actually followed to the core issues of community consultation and so forth, and ensuring that they actually do have a mechanism that enables this to be tied to be done before investment has actually been, money has been dispersed, could actually be a good mechanism that just enables a better community involvement and consultation in terms of these processes. And also issues of independent review of some of these ongoing processes, for example, around environmental social impact assessments, beyond just the oversight that is done by national regulators. I think there should be mechanisms that enable an independent review of some of these initiatives. But I think lastly towards this, I think one of the key aspects that we believe is integral and locates the role of communities, particularly having a stake in terms of ensuring a win-win situation, is around ensuring that there is financing that is provided, direct support to community groups and civil society organizations around addressing issues of building community capacity, to also really be active players in the processes that relate to their rights and livelihoods in critical minerals extraction, issues of ensuring that they are also independent monitors that can be able to substantiate evidence beyond what is produced in the sustainability report of some of these, for example, companies that will have gotten investment. So I think those are some of the mechanisms and some of the initiatives that we are calling for in terms of ensuring that financing should actually embedded around responsible business conduct, but also ensuring that communities do have a voice and stake in terms of addressing issues of environmental degradation and human rights violations. For now, I'll end here, moderator, and happy to pick on if possibly there could be additional questions that come from my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Veronica. I think that's really interesting because we should be doing this more actually, exchanging knowledge with our counterparts in other regions of the world and really highlighting some of the examples that worked, that didn't work. What are the potential learning opportunities together and capacity building jointly together in these topics. So thank you so much for that, Veronica. I have an eye on the time, and I know that we started a little bit late, so I'm going to ask the others that the next session after this one is going to be the networking reception, which is going to take place in the next room. So perhaps we could extend the session a little bit for about 10 minutes to take more questions from yourselves, and then we can move directly into the networking reception. Having said that, I'm looking at the floor here on site, but also I'm looking at my colleagues online also if there are any questions. This is your chance to ask your questions to the panelists. And I'm also looking at our panelists, perhaps if you'd like to react to the points of each other, please do so as well. Yes, can we have microphones, please? We have one question here, so I'm going to collect several for this. So if there is anyone else that would like to ask a question, please raise your hand so our colleagues can find you and hand over the mic. Please, go ahead.
Good afternoon. My question is related to the business and human rights with the representative from Law Ministry. Because Thailand, the case study of the business and human rights is very interesting one because it is among the first Asian country which has adopted it some in October 2019 in the first phase. Then after 2022, second phase, now you are in the process of drafting a legislation. My question is this, while you are legislating for it, are you constituting any quasi-judicial forum for it, or you would be utilizing the already existing court, number one? Number two, since Thailand is linking the business human rights with the SDGs, so the businesses who are following the business in human rights, are they getting any kind of incentives? And number three, is there any chapter regarding the minerals or the mining or regarding the protecting the rights of the workers over there? Thank you.
Okay, we don't have any other questions for now, so would you like to take this one, Spane?
Okay, I will answer your second question first. We have some incentive for any business who comply with our National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. Firstly, they can be a membership of the Global Compact Network Thailand, which is a network of like-minded business in Thailand. And this is a good platform for them to make a connection and business relationship with other like-minded companies. And the second incentive is that some of company can be included in the preferred list of public procurement, so they have a better chance to be selected by the government if they comply with the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. And these are some example of your of the second question. And the third question about any chance for mining in our National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. Yes, of course. As I have already mentioned that in Thailand we have 4 priority areas, right? The first one is labor, and the second one is environment, community, and national resources. I think these 2 priority area also cover the mining sector that operated in Thailand, and also the fourth priority area that is cross-border investments also cover the Thai mining company that invest in other country as well. But yes, we still have the challenge for the implementation of the NAP, and the biggest challenge is that NAP has no legal bindingness, and there is no enforcement for the NAP. So all responsibility under the NAP is on voluntary basis. So this is the big challenge for the NAP. And your first question, can I ask again? I'm sorry. Special court for remedy?
Forum. So without the judicial forums, you cannot, since you said it, that it lacked the legal backing. Mm-hmm. So once there would be a law passed by the act by the parliament, so are you suggesting any legal forum for the remedial purposes?
You mean for our
special courts like the labor courts?
Yes, we have labor court for that, and also if we already passed the human rights due diligence law, we also have the penalty for any violation and non-compliant with the legislation. And also we have the oversight committee, and this committee will monitor and review all of the report made by the company. So I think this is the monitoring mechanism, and also some of the how to say that how to ensure the good enforcement of the business and human rights in Thailand.
Because if you impose a penalty on a company where they can appeal, which would be the forum for the appeal? An appellate tribunal, what would be the mechanism for it?
Sorry, perhaps this is a discussion that can flow over to the networking, so we can give some more time for other questions. Mir, Supanat will be at the networking. Perhaps there is more scope for that. Yes, please.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for all the panelists and the very full event and the great discussion. And just a short introduction of myself. I'm Hui Ling. You can also call me Mia from Stockholm Environmental Institute. I'm working on climate finance and just energy transition. And I have 2 questions, like one question for Ruby and one question for Chaicha. And first of all, it was very impressive to insert concern with indigenous people into compliance with ADB. But I'm also wondering, like, what's the gap right now? And like, is there any like good example? As you mentioned, like it's very difficult to actually implement engagement with indigenous people. And do you have any good example, like to demonstrate like good practice which can be taken into consideration for other investors? And my question to Chaicha is because you're from a network, gathering investors. So I wonder, like, what's investors' perspective in terms of engaging indigenous people? And also, like, maybe question to 2 of you. what's the perspective indigenous people holding, like to engage with investor and corporation in critical mineral mining? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Before I hand over for the responses, can I call for another round of hands so that we could compile the questions before we respond? Any questions from online participants? No? All right. We have one more, I think. Or no? For a Thai question.
Yeah,
Okay.
in Thai.
Do we have... oh, all right. So she can ask a question and you can translate. Wonderful. Please go ahead. Yes.
Thank you ขอบคุณค่ะค่ะอยากถามผู้แทนจากกระทรวงยุติธรรมอะค่ะเพราะตอนนี้ปัญหาใหญ่ของไทยก็คือเหมืองของ
As of now, we have an issue with the mines at our neighbor country. There's going to be a trans-boundary issue. When it comes to these mines, these are illegal mines, and they have no responsibility. But our laboratory tests, when it comes to Department of Pollution Control, we have found the fingerprint of the minerals that we have independent researcher funded by the government. We found that it's rare earth and it's gold, confirmed. And there is an arsenic that exceeds 10 times clearly. As of now, when it comes to the Ministry of Justice, what are your procedures when it comes to international issues? If we proceed and if we can press charges about those mine operators, can we proceed and press charges with those that benefit from the supply chain? Because the purchaser has shown clearly.
Legally, but then there's some lab results that show that those mines that were being mined were like rare earth and it's like gold mine for sure. And then there's like over amount of cadmium that could be like 10 times more than the amount of cadmium that were allowed. So, but since they cannot do anything to the mine owner or to the business owner, is it possible to be able to like do some legal process or work with those that are actually benefits from the outcome of those mines?
Thank you so much. So then we have about 3 questions now. So I'm going to then hand over to the panel. Perhaps let's start with Eric Chetra and then we go to the Ministry of Justice. Yes, please go ahead.
Thanks, Mia. Thanks for your question. I'll take the one on investors' experiences addressing engagements with indigenous communities. I think I can think of a few examples where investors have allocated engagement responsibilities via the companies they invest in to set expectations. Like one major sort of activity that we undertake is on stewardship at AIGCC. So investors set expectations to their corporates on what are like emerging standards on engagement with indigenous people. I think I think the standards are changing right now. I think there's a lot of investor pressure towards looking at better social safeguards when it comes to indigenous people. I am being slightly more positive, I would say, because I think all of us are very aware of so many rights being missed when it comes to indigenous people. Maybe to put a positive spin on it, I think some emerging ways in which investors are engaging with indigenous people is demanding that the engagement with indigenous people starts way ahead. It's not when extraction is being conducted, it's pre-extraction, pre-permitting, actually mining in that area. That is one particular standard. The second one that I can think of that is again emerging is on community ownership. So there are two ways in which I mentioned the royalty output element, where there's a certain sort of monetary compensation to the indigenous community, wherein there's a certain allocation of financial benefit going to that community, and where they have the right to self-determine how to sort of use that trust fund, so to say, if I had to say. But these are new emerging scenarios. I think there is a lot of data that is available in pockets where there is highly geographically concentrated transition minerals mining. But we need a lot of sort of efforts to not make these emerging case studies that I mentioned, but to make it like the rule of law, to make it like a standard that is not bypassed. So that's one experience. I think Robbie will be able to comment a little bit more on it.
You first. Yes, then I can take it. The question on the gap, no, in relation to safeguards, is it of financial institutions and a good practice? Yeah. There's been hesitance, no, when we were engaging with the ADB to replace broad community support to free, prior, and informed consent. There's been a lot of hesitance within the bank to put free, prior, and informed consent. One, because of the question on identification of indigenous peoples. Second is, how is free, prior, and informed consent operationalized? But as we were going through the discussions within the bank, there were examples within, for example, the private sector unit of the bank, where they tried to implement the principles of free, prior, and informed consent, even with the broad community support that's in their current safeguards. No? So it's doable. And within the bank, there are people saying that we've been doing this on the ground, from the operations side, from the private sector side. The hesitance is more coming actually from the higher ones who are not on the ground. But the other one is also on the passing of responsibility from financial institutions to borrowers and clients. What we are saying is this is not the way to go forward. Banks, even investors, financial institutions, and even investors have the responsibility to still conduct human rights due diligence and not just rely on reports coming from companies, reports coming from borrowers and clients on their compliance to human rights standards. For example, the implementation of free, prior, and informed consent. It's not enough to look at the reports. Investors, financial institutions should be doing their own human rights due diligence to make sure that it's really implemented on the ground. But the other point that we're also putting out to financial institutions and investors is the grievance mechanism, which was also mentioned by Veronica a while ago, that it's not enough to have grievance mechanism within the borrowers, with clients, but investors and also financial institutions should also have an accessible and gender responsive and culturally appropriate grievance mechanism that affected communities can go to raise their grievances in relation to investments that's impacting their communities. I mean, we have to give the full option of access to remedy for affected communities, judicial and non-judicial, operational grievance mechanisms, and all that. Because right now, access to remedy is very much wanting for many affected communities. And I think the third one is also for the lack of transparency also of investments, also with the the bank, it's publicized, no? But for the side of investors, we've also been calling for transparency on investments, especially in indigenous people's territories. There's been some hesitance in relation to confidentiality, but what we're calling for is we need that kind of information to be able to look at who are those investing, because we have to look at the whole supply chain. We're not just looking at companies when we talk about accountability. We also have to look at where's the money coming from, because the responsibility is not just direct with the company, but also where the money is coming from and where these companies, where are the home countries of these companies, because there's also a responsibility of the home countries of these companies to make sure that your companies are operating in line with international human rights standards and the UN guiding principles, even if they are, for example, outside Thailand. So that's the whole course that we are looking at. I just want to react on the presentations then, if I may, because it's important, the point on deficit and oversupply in relation to critical minerals, because that's what we're also trying to look at, no? And it's important in policy making, and if from the investor side, that kind of research, that kind of analysis is being done, if that could be put out publicly, because for example, that's our question, how much of nickel do you still need to mine? There's already an oversupply of nickel, but still there are still nickel mining operations that are happening, and there are those in the pipeline. So how much of nickel is still needed? How much of the other minerals are still needed? Where is the oversupply? Where is the deficit? For us to be able to understand better, and even for policymakers and the ASEAN Energy Center to really be able to look at, do we still need to mine out? We have finite resources, we are being flooded, landslide is happening in indigenous communities. What we're saying is, for example, an 11.6 megawatt project in a 54 indigenous people's household. This protects 1,600 hectares of rainforest. This reduces this number of liters of diesel that's to be used, for example, for generators. That's the kind of return of investment that communities are putting forward. It's not on profit, but it's more from the sustainability side and protection of the people and the planet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robbie. I know we are running out of time, but I didn't want to interrupt her because she's bringing out very, very important points. Let me go straight to Supanat, please, for the other question. Would you like to speak in Thai? Or?
Yeah, yes,
okay.
please. So let me speak in Thai. ขอบคุณสำหรับคำ
Thank you very much for the question. The question that you have raised, I do believe, is extremely sensitive, and enforcement is going to be a challenge because it's occurred in a different country, but the impact is felt in Thailand.
The questions that you raised was actually sensitive issues because the action take place at the neighboring countries, but the impacts within Thailand.
คือการดำเนินการของ
When it comes to any procedures for our side, we cannot proceed directly with the mine that operates in our neighboring country. Any procedures must go through diplomacy, which the government and the Thai officials, we are not sitting still and trying to mediate the situation. Now, we have to consider what are the things when it comes to remediate the situation. Is there any, there is one procedure that I do believe could be beneficial in trying to remediate the situation is, let me give you an example. At present, that we created a quota system of importing maize from our neighboring country that wasn't, that didn't, came from slash and burn. Our measure is to decrease the issue of the PM 2.5 haze. We have to consider about what are our departments, ministries can actually deal with the issues with the mines from our neighboring country. That we can use our economic influence, our economic leverage to remediate with the situation. Furthermore, if in the near future, if we can drive any kind of legislation draft or mandatory human rights diligence, it will create the connectivity between the private sector in Thailand that may be relating to the operations overseas. If we pass this law in Parliament, we may have the private sector of these operations overseas. We can actually press charges in our country. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you so much for that. And we are out of time. But what I'm trying to do, I'm not going to attempt to summarize that, but I'm going to look at the panelists. Perhaps, okay, one line, yeah, one line from each panelists. What is your key takeaway from this discussion on, basically we cannot stop development. We don't want to stop it. None of us here is anti-development, as Robbie said in the beginning. But what is the main message you have to this very multi-stakeholder panel and also to the participants on the path forward towards sustainability in the transition minerals supply chain in Asia? What needs to happen? What can your organization contribute to step towards the right direction on that sustainability path? One line per person. Let me start with Ace, Ambia.
Thank you so much. So, one line, yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's very interesting. It's very interesting discussion. I learned a lot from the panelists and audience because now is really timing that ASEAN Center for Energy as a part of the ASEAN. We will announce officially the ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation in the next 2 weeks under the Ministry of Energy meeting. So what I learned, like having a shared knowledge platform is one of the key to enhance the knowledge sharing and capacity building among related stakeholders in ASEAN. We understand we have formulated like official target and guidance for the next 5 years, but the implementation is another challenge. The implementation is the key, how we could ensure this next 5 years we really follow the theme that we learn, and that we need a partnership from all and indigenous people as well, because we learn that policy making process is from top down. But to ensure the successful implementation, we also need all the collaboration from financial institutions as well, and indigenous people and other ASEAN member states. That's all. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Let me go to Eric.
Everyone, and thank you again to Fair Finance for hosting this session. I think for us, it's really just to say that ENS due diligence and obtaining FPIC is really not a voluntary thing. It's not a checkbox exercise. It's a compliance and it's a mandatory thing. And And really, as Robbie said, once Indigenous peoples are part of the projects, they're partners, and they can really, help get that stakeholder buy-in and really make projects better. I think in terms of, the session, really lessons learned and best practices. I think that's what we need. Mining isn't a new thing, but this critical mineral boom is really attracting a lot of people into the sector. And so how can we really do it well and do it so that it supports communities and countries to support others? Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. And Veronica.
I think just the key takeaways for me is that I think such platforms need to be more amongst, I think, cross regions. Particularly, I think for us in Africa, there's a lot that we can definitely learn in terms of the milestones that Asian countries have done and financial institution banks have done in terms of addressing some of these issues of integrating environmental and social safeguards in the critical minerals rush. And I think more importantly, I think what's needed is definitely locating and situating the role of communities and civil society in terms of really being active parties in the whole investment trail. So I think there needs to be better interface and collaboration, especially by financial institutions, locating the role of civil society and communities, especially to be independent provide independent oversight around some of the financing that they are doing in terms of the sector for better monitoring, but also to ensure that there is also practice that dictates beyond just the theoretical aspects that are provided in some of these policy frameworks. So that would be my key takeaway. So thank you so much once again for this opportunity and looking forward to further collaboration and learning. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Veronica. I'll be more strict with the last three. Chetra, one line.
One line for me is, in addition to focusing on the financing dimension as part of our Just Transition Working Group, I think what I realized from this panel and also through my recent experiences, I think we need to focus on the entire spectrum of the Just Transition stakeholder. I think workers and workforce transformation has been obviously a first priority, but there's a whole lot of other sub-issues and other stakeholders that need to be uniformly consulted when it comes to just transition planning. So that's where some of my resources and some of our attention as part of the working group will be concentrated towards. Thanks.
Wonderful. Robbie, it worked. You will have hopefully more consultations together with Chetra in the future. Super nice.
Okay, one line for me is the real one line. Is that partnership is the key for sustainable transition, and we have to cooperate with all stakeholders in order to ensure that the transition is sustainable.
Wonderful. Robbie, you had the first, now you have the last word.
The engagement with Indigenous people should not just be as mere stakeholders. Indigenous peoples are rights holders, solution bearers, stewards. So don't just count us in as one of the mere stakeholders, but the engagement should be rights-based. We have a lot at stake, our land, our life, and our future.
Wonderful. I couldn't have said that better. Thank you so much, Robbie. I also learned many different perspectives and different angles of the discussions, even as we are already working in this topic. But of course, for me, it's always interesting to bring multi-stakeholder perspectives together. I think in this panel, we really highlighted, of course, Indigenous people's rights, at the front and center of the discussion. And I think it was really interesting to hear from the investors' perspectives and also encouraging that perhaps this is going to factor in for future discussion. It's also interesting to hear from the perspective of multilateral development banks because, of course, we see them as a driver for potential influence and change, in the countries where they work in, and to really, bring the benchmark of policies higher when it comes to projects including transition mineral mining and in the extractive sector. But more importantly, I found it really interesting to see a national level experience sharing from Thailand. What it would look like if one country has really a very deliberate approach to creating corporate responsibility, and also how that's is going to look like also with a regional approach, as we saw from the ASEAN perspective, that's both should be together. It's complementary. It's not that we need one over the other. Of course, it's important that we have very strong national level approach, but also a very strong regional approach to coordinate that. And I think we are seeing a lot of movement in the region, and we hope this would continue. And from Veronica, of course, it's very interesting to hear from the African perspective. And I think we do this, we should do this more in Fair Finance Asia and exchange more with other regions in the world, especially in Latin America and in Africa, through the Fair Finance International platform, as we are both, in very different learning paths, but also levels. And I think it's important for us to fertilize each other's learning journey through this. On that note, we are over time, but the next session after this is actually the networking reception. There were a lot of outstanding questions and perhaps more clarifications that are needed, and we would meet each other at, can somebody tell me, is it ballroom? Okay, I think Finn is going. Ballroom 1.
Yes.
Is going to be where the reception is. So basically when you walk out the door, you turn left. That would be the last room to your left side. We are ready for the networking reception, so we can go straight there and we can continue our conversation. So thank you so much again, everybody who are here in the room and also those that are online. Thank you to all the speakers. I really appreciated your participation, and we look forward to further discussions in this dialogue that we started. Good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Bear, and everyone. So as Bear mentioned, we have the reception at the ballroom 1. So please, when you walk outside the room, there will be a coupon from the staff handed to you. You can use that coupon to enter our cocktail reception in ballroom 1. And just another reminder that on Friday, the 3rd of October from 7 a.m., we do have another outdoor session, which is a run at Benjakiti Park Museum entrance. So if you are free in the morning, please join us and use the QR code to register. I hope everyone can enjoy your evening at our cocktail reception, and thank you once again.
Thank you.